inviting me. I feel very nervous speaking to a group of blockchain experts. I'm used to talking to lay people about this stuff, law students or sociology students or the general public or whatever. So I've been a bit. So much of what I say will probably be familiar to at least some of you. Bits of what I say will be no news, and I apologize if for that in advance. What I do know a lot about is the sociology of money. I've been studying it for most of my adult life, it seems. I went into the sociology of money before many people were working on it back in 1990, when I 87 to 90 actually was my PhD. I was supervised by Tony Giddens, who thought that money would be a great topic to look at because nobody really had, and there was me working in the UK. Viviana Zelitzer was working simultaneously in the US, but I didn't know of her at the time. And since then, of course, the interest in money has really gone through the roof. And Bitcoin was a great boost, really. A student of mine said a few years back, not that long ago, actually, when I said, I'm getting more requests for interviews in the Bitcoin age than I've ever had before. And she just looked and she said, well, money's cool now, isn't it? So it was for a while. I'm not sure it still is. Bitcoin's got a strange reputation. Anyway, Victoria talked about two sides of my work. And in some ways, something I'm going to say here is that they've come together in a way that I wasn't really expecting, because I've discovered first UBI schemes such as Circles, which is based in Berlin, which wants to use the blockchain and is trying to use the blockchain, which I think is fascinating. But also one of my old associations with the Brixton pound, which is a local currency in London. If anybody's not seen it, look it up and look up the Ziggy, which is their £10 note, which has an image of Bowie on it, David Bowie, and it's one of the more famous examples of a local currency in the world. And they have had a bit of a hiatus during lockdown, but they're coming back in December, and they're planning to mint a coin alongside their local currency, alongside the Brixton pound, using the Algorand blockchain, which I'm sure many of you will know. So part of what I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks and months is joining them and doing, I suppose, what I'd call an ethnography, just tracking what's going on there. So it's quite exciting. So the two sides of what I'm doing can kind of come together in ways I wasn't really expecting. Okay, I'll go on. So this is meant to be a talk about the future of money, but before I go on, I'll talk a little bit about the past, and in particular changes that I feel have been happening in the monetary landscape more or less since the demise of the Bretton Woods system in the 1970s. That's a major cutting off point for ways that I think should be clear without me needing to go into it in too much detail. And I think since the 1970s, we were witnessing two countervailing trends in the world of money. On the one side, there was a tendency towards greater homogenization, and we saw that with the growth of complex financial instruments that had money-like properties, including eventually derivatives. But before then, things like Eurodollars and petrodollars.
You might want to listen to this guy on the Bitcoin.
I'm sorry. I just heard someone talking. And then the widespread dollarization, which we still see, and I'm going to talk about El Salvador a little later, because their economy is dollarized in that regard. And also, of course, monetary union and the Eurozone, which is something that happened very early on in my career as a monetary sociologist, and was the sort of first kind of experiment in putting together a new currency that I was able to witness in real time. On the other side, we've had a tendency towards diversification of money, and this has been marked, I think, from the 1980s onwards, but there's been a second wave in the last 15 years or so, I think since the financial crisis, actually. And this here we've seen the rise of local currencies, community currencies, but also private forms of money, such as digital currencies. And I think up until quite recently, these two tendencies were holding each other in check. They were in a certain amount of tension. But I think where Bitcoin has come in and cryptocurrencies come in, I think we're now seeing more diversification than anything else. I think diversification has the upper hand. And this process has been furthered by disruptive innovation in the payments industry. And here I'm thinking of the work of Bill Maurer's group in the UCI, University of California, Irvine, people like Maurer, Lana Swartz. And this is really characterized by the emergence of the mobile phone over the plastic card as a major source of or means of payment. I'd be intrigued to know, present in this group, what do you mainly use in your everyday payments? Certainly, I'm increasingly not using cash. I'm not using plastic. I mostly just use my phone to pay. These changes in the monetary landscape have certainly posed a threat to the relationship between money and the state, but also a second threat, which is the relationship between money and banks, which I don't think people talk about quite so much. And I'm calling these two forms of monetary disintermediation, whereas money is being decoupled from states on the one side and from banks on the other. And I've put some examples of work on this on the slide. Bitcoin is interesting because I think it demonstrates both forms of disintermediation at the same time. And I think this is important part of its appeal, political appeal. On the one hand, libertarians and anarchists support Bitcoin because they want to see money removed from control.
Professor Dodd, sorry to interrupt you. We're not seeing the slides at the moment if you're intending to show them. So I just wanted to alert you to that. They're not projecting. And also we are getting a little bit of interference in the sound, I think, when you move your arm. So just wanted to make you aware of that as well. So we don't miss anything.
Vicky, I'm seeing the slides.
You're seeing the slides? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Can you see them?
I don't see the slides.
I see the slides.
Okay. All right. Never mind. It just seems to be at my end. So do carry on. And apologies for the interruption.
Right. And I'll stop waving my arms.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll tie them behind my back. Okay, so Bitcoin appeals to the political sentiments of those who blame banks and not government for the 2000 crisis and are troubled by the power of banks and the Wall Street system. And particularly they're critical of fractional reserve banking. And this is often something that I've heard from Bitcoiners in particular. They have a rather conspiratorial understanding of the way that banking works. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So what I'm saying here is I think politically there are reasons for supporting Bitcoin right across the political spectrum. So what kind of money is Bitcoin, if indeed we can talk about it as a form of money? And I think that there are question marks there. Broadly speaking, there are two competing dominant theories of money in the literature that are of interest certainly to sociologists and other social scientists, such as anthropologists, geographers, and political scientists. On the one side, there is the commodity theory of money associated with the Austrian school, the work of Menger. You find it in Adam Smith. And this is where money represents or consists of a commodity, and its value is derived from that commodity, and it's most commonly gold, but it can be other things too. The other theory, the one better known and more widely used by sociologists and by heterodox economists, is the commodity, the credit or claim theory of money. And this is where money's value derives from its status as a promise to pay. These two conceptions pan out into different accounts of the history of money. The first, relating to the commodity theory, says that money originated in attempts to make barter more efficient at scale. The second originates with the idea that money, the first forms of money were forms of tribute and connected subsequently to taxation. Likewise, these two theories of money give rise to distinct notions of how money should be governed. The first, the commodity theory, suggests that the best way to govern money is by market mechanisms. The second claims that the best way to govern and regulate money is through the state. And now, while money or most alternative currencies are characterized in relation to credit or claim theories of money that highlight its social properties and its dependence on trust, Bitcoin stands out in that it's generally characterized in relation to commodity theories of money. This seems counterintuitive. After all, Bitcoin is abstract, but it does explain why notions of scarcity and the capping of supply are so important to perceptions of Bitcoin's value, and indeed to its appeal as an investment. And I'll come back to this in a short while. Of course, Bitcoin is just one of around 6,000 cryptocurrencies currently in existence, although it still remains quite dominant. I'll mostly be referring to Bitcoin today, but I realize that there is all kinds of disruption and splintering in the crypto space. I'll be referring now and again to Ethereum, but also to the development recently of stablecoins, such as Tether. As I've already said, my work in this area has really gone into an interesting arc recently in a way that I wasn't really expecting, because I was quite comfortable with the idea that I had Bitcoin on the one side, which was one kind of alternative currency drawing on one kind of theory, and all the other alternatives on the other side that were drawing on a different kind of theory, a different set of assumptions. But these forms are coming together. So you have, as I've already mentioned, the Brixton Pound, who are going into this space. They're very conscious of the reputational damage that this could cause them because of the association of Bitcoin with rampant libertarianism and all sorts of unpleasant things in the minds of still a lot of members of the general public, including the kinds of people that they want to appeal to. And I had a conversation actually with one of the organizers of the Brixton Pound just before this talk, just to get an update with what they're doing. And he was saying Algorand are absolutely determined to challenge these notions. And one of the reasons why Algorand have given the Brixton Pound a very sizable grant is to employ the Brixton Pound as a kind of vehicle for challenging these narrower notions of cryptocurrency that they find unhelpful. Likewise, I'm intrigued by the development of UBI in relation to the blockchain, and I've spoken already to people associated with circles, but that's another thing that I'll be researching in the next year. So that's the preamble, and what I want to do now is as quickly as I can make 15 points. I've even numbered them, so I hope that is okay. I'll start with very short points, and then I'll develop a bit of an argument as I go. I'm bound to be taking shortcuts, and I'm sure in places I'll be saying things that are mistakes or that you disagree with, and we can pick those up afterwards. Point one, I hope, is not too controversial. I certainly see this in Victoria's work. Bitcoin is a techno utopia. Well, it seems futuristic. It seems to be without politics, or inefficient or corrupt institutions, or their irrational and flawed decisions. One could say that Bitcoin replaces Hobbes, centralized money produced by a sovereign issuer, with Rousseau, a decentralized money produced through the will of all. That certainly seems to be the theory behind it, or the ideology behind it. In sociological terms, I could quote Zimmel here, Bitcoin seems to dispense with the inherent sociality of money, the sense of money being a claim upon society. And it seems to replace trust in people and institutions with trust in code. That's the image, at least. In monetary terms, at stake here, I think, are four central ideas. First is the idea that the Bitcoin network is decentered and flat. There's no hierarchy, no single point of authority, and above all, and this is the key to libertarians, no state. Second, Bitcoin seems to offer reliable technological solutions to some of the age-old problems of monetary governance, most obviously the problem of inflation, which again, some of the more extreme Bitcoiners regard as a bit of a conspiracy against the people, as I'll go on to explain in a moment. Third, Bitcoin dispenses with the need to trust others, so it would seem, whether they are experts, politicians, or ordinary people. And you still see on the website of Bitcoin.org references to, we don't need to trust people. We've got the code. A fourth, finally, and I think this is a really important one, to the idea of Bitcoin being divorced from the banking system. Bitcoin is debt-free money, just like gold. Now, as I hope will become clear as I go on, I don't really think that the first three of this list of four properties of Bitcoin really hold up on closer inspection. I don't think it's quite as straightforward as these ideas would suggest. And as for the fourth, I'm not really sure what's so great about the idea of a debt-free money, actually, on closer inspection. But again, I can talk about that as we go. So point two, my second argument, for all of its utopian properties, for all that it seems forward-looking, I think Bitcoin is actually quite backward-looking. I think the way it operates, the conceptions behind it, are much closer to the past of money rather than the future. I think as an ideology, a theory, a philosophy, Bitcoin might be seen, if I was trying to be particularly controversial, and why not, as a throwback, a regressive step, even a relic. You'll see this case being implicit in what follows. You may disagree, and I mean, that's partly why I'm saying things in this way, so that you will disagree. Point three, or argument three, Bitcoin relies on a flawed theory of money. Perhaps as a sociologist, I would say that, wouldn't I? But for me, by treating money as a thing, a commodity, even a virtual commodity, whose supply must be controlled in order for it to have value, is simply mistaken. I think any sociologists, most sociologists would agree, and other social scientists, that money gains its value from its properties as something social, something that's embedded in a social process. Bitcoin treats money as apolitical, and I think that's a contradiction. And I think it's a contradiction because I do think that Bitcoin and the blockchain more generally, and I think I'm reading this in Victoria's book, has politics. I think politics are absolutely intrinsic to the way that these things work. While advocates of Bitcoin emphasize the absence of hierarchy and of authority and the presence of distributed decision-making, in practice, technology cannot enact social organization by itself. As a form of money, Bitcoin has, I think, been sustained by sociological features such as structure, leadership, hierarchy, trust, friendship, and community, much more than it has evaded them. And I think one of the ways in which one can understand the differences between the different currencies and indeed different forms of the blockchain, again, I'm reading this in Victoria's book, is to look at these sociological features, to look at how these technologies operate as social spaces and social systems, if you like. A system that originally appealed because of its distributed qualities is in some ways rather centralized, which takes me to point 5, which is that Bitcoin has a social structure with its own specific social inequalities. In 2020, a Bloomberg report based on data provided by Flipside Crypto suggested that Bitcoin whales were increasing their share to the extent that around 2% of Bitcoiners owned around 95% of Bitcoin wealth. Earlier this year, the UK's Daily Telegraph claimed that around 2,500 individuals, whales, control around 40% of the Bitcoin market. The issue here is partly about wealth concentration and partly about market integrity because of the whale's capacity for price manipulation. The figures might be exaggerated, referring to work by Raphael Schultz-Kraft, Glassnode, who argues that arguments about Bitcoin wealth concentration are misleadingly based on network addresses, whereas one user can control multiple addresses and one address can hold the funds from multiple users. So his revised analysis based on what he calls Bitcoin entities of different sizes suggests that the 2% actually control only about 70% of Bitcoin wealth, but it's still quite a lot. Bitcoin mining also raises important questions about the concentration of decision-making within the network. Given that around 7 mining groups now own around 80% of computing power within the Bitcoin network, one might imagine that this poses a threat to the network as a whole. And I'm sure people here will know far more about this than I do. But most of this focuses on the possibility of a 51% attack. Theoretically, there should be no rational incentive for a powerful miner or group of miners to engage in manipulative practices that would most likely undermine the value of the currency they hold. This, at least, was the argument being made in the original Satoshi white paper. Looking beyond Bitcoin, Ethereum Classic was subjected to 3 51% attacks last August 2020, although these didn't appear to have a significant impact on its price. It's worth noting here, and again, this will be no news to any of you, that the regular and much larger Ethereum network plans to go to a proof of stake consensus system in December this year, which should deal with this problem to some degree because it lowers barriers to entry. Whatever conclusions one draws here, it is this close interaction between technical and political issues that makes Bitcoin and indeed other cryptocurrencies sociologically interesting, certainly for me, especially in the light of the ideological claim, crucial to libertarians and anarchists alike, that they effectively depoliticize money. My next argument, Bitcoin is gendered. While the gender split within the Bitcoin community has been changing, or appears to have been changing over the past couple of years, the discourse surrounding these changes demonstrates that cryptocurrency and gender interact in ways that are crucial to its utopian narrative. First, the demographics depend on where you look. On the CoinDance platform, Bitcoin is being portrayed as an unambiguously male-centric world, with a male-female split of 85 to 15%. And anybody doing a computer science course, certainly in the UK, would back up this impression. But the picture is becoming more complicated, according to research commissioned by Gemini, a cryptocurrency exchange based on the UK and published earlier this year. Well, the survey found that 74% of crypto holders are indeed men and 71% are white. In fact, the average cryptocurrency owner is a 38-year-old white male, making approximately $1,011 per year. There are some signs of change. Of the 13.5% of the survey's nationally representative sample who are current or previous crypto investors, 41.6% are women, while the 9% of those who are planning to invest, 40% are women, double the number suggested by previous research. What interests me most here is the way that Gemini's somewhat speculative findings about the future of cryptocurrency demographic have played straight into a utopian narrative that Bitcoin already enables more inclusive banking and finance. Consider this piece in Cointelegraph, complete with the rather sweet illustration. This claims that the number of women in crypto is skyrocketing. Crypto lets everyone access wealth, the story runs. Here again, decentralization is crucial to the Bitcoin story. The article describes Bitcoin as the world's largest decentralized currency, which democratizes finance by allowing those who have historically been disempowered by banking to have equal access to capital. Bitcoin for the unbanked. And this isn't all. Bitcoin can also help women who are victims of domestic violence and economic abuse, the article claims. These claims are in stark contrast to the depiction of the cryptocurrency world offered by Brett Scott when he described it as a crypto patriarchy. Scott's article suggests that Bitcoin is highly gendered social space in which women are routinely intimidated. Crypto patriarchy was published 7 years ago. So we could ask, has the world changed as dramatically as the Gemini findings would suggest? Either way, what seems clear here is that gender matters to Bitcoin's utopian narrative. Argument 7, Bitcoiners are often, but not always, libertarian. In practice, while you can find Bitcoiners right across the political spectrum, more of them self-identify as libertarian or anarchists than anything else, I would say. Although, as I've already said, they are also anti-bank and anti-Wall Street. Now, according to research undertaken by Louis Smith, who was a London-based PhD student in the early years of cryptocurrency, Bitcoiners were actually quite varied in their political beliefs. He found that around a quarter of Bitcoiners were libertarian, around a quarter liberal, around a quarter were left-wing, and a few smaller groups of other political identities dotted around. Contrary to expectations, Smith argued Bitcoiners were not overwhelmingly libertarian, nor were they driven by greed. In fact, many of them were members of the precariat. In The Politics of Bitcoin, published in 2016, David Columbia takes a very different view, casting most Bitcoiners as right-wing extremists spouting the kind of dogma associated with, I'm quoting, the Liberty League, the John Birch Society, the militia movement, and the Tea Party, as well as conspiracy theorists like Alec Jones and David Icke. Such views are of a piece, Columbia argues, with the image of the monetary and financial system itself as tantamount to a conspiracy against the people. He's worth quoting, because I think it shows how the very image we have of the way that the monetary system works is inherently fraught with political assumptions. He argues, to anyone unaware of the history of right-wing thought in the United States and Europe, Columbia argues, Bitcoiners' beliefs are shockingly familiar. That central banking, such as that practiced by the US Federal Reserve, is a deliberate plot to steal value from the people to whom it actually belongs. That the world monetary system is on the verge of imminent collapse due to central banking policies, especially fractional reserve banking, that hard currencies such as gold provide meaningful protection against that purported collapse, then inflation is a plot to steal money from the masses and hand it over to a shadowy cabal of elites who operate behind the scenes. And more generally, that the governmental and corporate leaders and wealthy individuals we all know are controlled by those same elites. The ideological background to this configuration of beliefs consists of a combination of cyber libertarianism, which espouses the internet as non-regulated space, and neoliberalism. Whether one agrees or not with Columbia's critique, what matters most, I think, is that Bitcoiners very often do articulate political reasons for using Bitcoin. Arguably, the decision to invest in and use Bitcoin is an expression of identity as much as it is a financial decision. This point is given nuance in a piece by Christopher Beam published last month in Bloomberg Business Week called A Field Guide to the Crypto Faithful. Beam portrays cryptocurrency users as tribes whose political views are quite distinct, not least from each other. Which one you own says a lot about who you are, he argues, your philosophy, your friend circle, even your fashion sense. Each cryptocurrency represents an entire culture with its own memes, aesthetic, language, trusted voices, and power structure. Buying one is not only an investment, it's a declaration of identity. This leads me to argument 8. While Bitcoin is antisocial in a way that I've tried to describe, Bitcoiners themselves seem remarkably social. Going by its design, Bitcoin seems like a currency without trust, depending on technology as opposed to social organization. Yet in practice, Bitcoiners communicate a lot. There are countless meetings, conventions, meetups, and a very active Reddit. Bitcoin, even with Bitcoin balloons. Bitcoin may be a virtual currency whose production is carried out by a computer network, but those who use it often express quite a strong sense of collective identity, far stronger than one ever finds in the case of mainstream currencies. If anything, one might argue that Bitcoin is not just a techno-utopia, but myriad social utopias, because it appeals to a range of interests and concerns about the nature of money itself, and more broadly, its role in society. In this sense, perhaps Bitcoin is a social movement as much as it has been a currency. But if Bitcoin is a social movement, what are its aims? Bitcoin could arguably be seen as a protest currency, which, because it separates money from both banks and states, resonates with two major axes of political debate about the relationship between money, finance, and the state. The first axis relates to the 2008 financial crisis. For all of their political diversity, Bitcoiners seem to unite around the common view that there are major problems with our existing monetary system, which require radical solutions, not piecemeal reform. This is the political conversation that sustains Bitcoin, one might say. And it's related especially to the problematization of debt. Many Bitcoiners have issues with the state too, and this takes us to the second axis on which Bitcoin operates as a protest currency, and which situates a new currency in a post-2001 world. Bitcoin could almost be a mirror image of the state's increasing use post-9/11 of the mainstream financial system for security purposes and surveillance. While Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are often advocated as a means of bringing financial services to the unbanked, another part of their appeal is enabling us to engage in financial transactions without inviting the kind of surveillance that we are being subjected to when we use mainstream financial services. This has important connections to the decline of cash, which I'll talk about in a moment. Argument 9, Bitcoin is primarily a financial asset and a highly successful one at that, which easily outstrips gold. But even as the Bitcoin price continues rising, there are obviously some serious problems with it connected to the exchanges, security, scaling, and energy use. Although a shift such as that happening within Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake should help to reduce this problem considerably. 10th argument, Bitcoin has parallels with gold and appeals to many users as a return to fundamental value, albeit in digital form. While the comparison between Bitcoin and gold often focuses solely on price, there are some deeper connections. Historically, Nick Szabo's scheme for establishing a decentralized currency called BitGold, published 1998, is often cited as one of the major precursors of Bitcoin, to the extent that he was reputed by some to be Satoshi, author of the original Bitcoin white paper in 2008. Like gold, Bitcoin's supply is finite, but there may also be a deeper yearning with Bitcoin for more profound and stable forms of value in an era when value itself seems to have lost any anchorage in reality. The 2008 crisis was often portrayed as a crisis of fictitious capital. And paradoxically, Bitcoin appeals to some of its users as an antidote to this. It is digital gold, only an improvement on gold, whose production is controlled by machines. 11th argument, and one which will be very familiar to people here, Bitcoin is memory. Viewed as a distributed ledger, blockchain technology encourages another kind of epistemic or epistemological utopianism that goes beyond money. Members of this research group will know far more than me about real-world use cases for the blockchain. But one thing they seem to have in common is the conviction that the blockchain enables greater transparency, fairness, and accountability in contracts. Above all, perhaps, is the belief that the blockchain is immutable, that it never forgets, that may explain some unusual blockchain use cases, such as legal fling, which was designed to verify sexual consent, and tree chain, which is a blockchain for trees. Some Bitcoiners I've spoken to have demonstrated a quasi-religious zeal about what this form of money means to them. It is as if, contrary to the infinitely copyable world of plenty we associate with digital media, and which makes financial instruments such as derivatives seem so scary, the blockchain makes finitude and singularity possible, so much so that there seems to be something deeply satisfying about the idea that money is an immutable thing. This, it seems, is money with godlike guarantees, albeit no God. Or to put it another way, Bitcoin offers monetary security during a post-value, post-truth era. This may help to explain why, and this is my 12th argument, Bitcoin is cultish. The conversation around Bitcoin has always been peppered with biblical language, references to Old Testament versions of the Bitcoin design. Roger Vere's nickname was Bitcoin Jesus. Comparisons between different Bitcoin protocols and the Tower of Babel are quite common. And of course, Satoshi is often referred to as the Bitcoin Messiah. There have been several stories about who the real Satoshi is. I've got experience of one of them. Although given that this talk is going to go public, I'm not going to talk about it. But what interests me far more than who the real Satoshi might be is that for a form of money that advertises itself as being above politics, above people, above trust, above organization, Bitcoin seems deeply embroiled in its own origin story. This is what I meant earlier, partly, when I said that Bitcoin is as much about looking backwards as it is about looking forwards. Next point, which should actually be point 13, misnumbered there, I can't count, I'm a sociologist. Bitcoin performs poorly as money, which I guess is the brunt of what I want to say, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody not expressed in this way. By this, I simply mean that it's not very efficient or trustworthy as a means of payment. It's difficult to imagine how any rational individual would want to use a currency as a means of payment whose value either fluctuates wildly, as Bitcoin often does, or rises inexorably, which makes it hyper deflationary. I found Bitcoin's adoption as legal tender in El Salvador earlier this month mystifying from this perspective. Where Bitcoin's legal tender, let's be clear, traders are obliged to accept it as payment, which exposes them both to immediate risk of the price crashing and ongoing uncertainty. How do you set prices in a currency that whose value fluctuates so widely? Little wonder that there have been protests against Bitcoin in El Salvador, with the government being accused of authoritarianism. As far as prices are concerned, Bitcoin could, of course, still be used with another unit of account, such as the dollar, which is indeed what happens in El Salvador. But this begs the question, why would one use money as a means of payment at all? Well, in principle, stable coins such as Tether, True USD and Paxos offer a halfway house between crypto and fiat currencies, combining the stability of the latter, which is achieved through pegging, collateralization, and or an algorithmic mechanism adjusting supply, with the privacy and freedom associated with the former. The stablecoin market is currently worth around $120 billion, with significant potential for scaling up in cases such as DM, which is closely associated with Facebook. The US Treasury is considering launching an investigation by the Financial Stability Oversight Council. Indeed, stable coins are sometimes being referred to as the new shadow banks. In 2019, a G7 working group published a report on stable coins, which identified several major risks they pose, such as money laundering, cybersecurity, and tax compliance. Significantly, the report also claimed that those stable coins that reach global scale could pose significant challenges and risks to monetary policy, financial stability, and the international monetary system, along with fair competition. So, will stable coins be regulated out of existence, and what would this mean for the role of cryptocurrency in the future of money? According to Christian Catalini, who is the co-creator of DM, and Jay Massari, writing in the Harvard Business Review, the very fact that stablecoins are coming under such close scrutiny by regulators is revealing in itself. Regulators typically only pay this level of attention to systemically important segments of the financial system, such as banks and money market funds, they argue. Unlike cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, which widely fluctuate in value, stable coins have the potential to play an important, if yet to be defined, role in the future of global finance. They could even become a backbone for payments and financial services, they claim. Given their price stability, then, are stablecoins more likely to be used as means of payment? So far, they're mainly being used by investors seeking to balance risk within their crypto portfolios, or in other words, to buy crypto. Although they have been described as icebreakers for people who are intrigued by cryptocurrency, but nevertheless who are cautious. And they're increasingly being used in transactions that resemble traditional banking, such as savings accounts. Moreover, by lowering transaction costs and connecting the unbanked and underbanked to the financial system, stablecoins also have the potential for enabling cash transfer programs such as UBI, which is one reason I find them potentially interesting. Whether stablecoins will play a leading role in the future of money is and must remain an open question. It's such a fast developing space, as we were discussing earlier on. But the close interest of regulators and banks in this market may mean that the basic utopian idea of a disintermediated money, with which I began this talk, set free from states and banks, would be undermined. Stable coins already bear a much closer resemblance to conventional fiat currencies than Bitcoin. Tether, which dominates this market, is not mined, but minted, for example, and key decisions in relation to it are centralized. From this perspective, perhaps the ultimate dystopian outcome, surely a case of Back to the Future, would be for central banks to launch their own digital currencies. Well, according to Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, a central bank digital currency would render stablecoins completely obsolete. Coming towards the end of the talk, and I'll put my cards on the table and say I think Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can and should be part of a diverse monetary ecology. Bitcoin is both a symptom of increasing monetary pluralism in advanced capitalist societies and an embodiment of monetary diversity in its own right. Neither Bitcoin nor any other cryptocurrency will ever be our only form of money, not least because, as I've already intimated, they don't perform particularly well as means of payment. What we are seeing now, I think, is the opposite tendency, not towards the global dominance of one form of money, as some Bitcoiners would desire, but rather towards increasing monetary pluralism at all levels. This pluralism consists of diversity in our forms of money, as well as diversity in the infrastructure that supports money, the rails on which it travels. The range of monies we regularly use is, I think, increasing. One can argue, and I would argue, that this is largely a positive development. We can choose which forms of money we want to use according to convenience, according to taste, necessity, or even ideology. Money has been diversifying partly because it needs to serve a diverse set of social and economic requirements and is embedded in various cultural and political systems. There are issues here, of course. When do we have too many forms of money? Money works best when we don't really have to think about it. The cryptocurrency ecosystem is complex enough as it is, which makes the adoption even of stable coins for everyday payments seem quite a distant prospect. What I also see here is a more worrying trend, wherein there are closer connections between money and identity, between what we use money for and privately owned data. Money is becoming a powerful tool of data surveillance. And because so many of us seem either ignorant of this or uncaring about it, I'd like to see this acknowledged more openly and debated more rigorously across the board. Who has access to our payments card data? Should this data be sold? Moreover, our formal legal identity as citizens is increasingly being anchored to our status as financial subjects. And we see that very much in the UK, where financial identity has become a major tool of immigration control. All of this might be taken as an argument in favor of Bitcoin, but if so, it is also a compelling argument in favor of cash. And I'll come out as a true retro king here by saying I don't think that Bitcoin will destroy cash, or certainly I hope it does not. If Bitcoin offers an opportunity to use money outside of the massive apparatus of financial and state surveillance, this is surely a good thing, but it is also something we should use to think more carefully about the destruction of cash. In some countries, this process is well underway. And look at what comes up top on this index of cashless countries, Canada. So maybe those present can inform me about this. Cash tends to be used disproportionately by the poor. And I think it's crucially important to remember this. The poor aren't appealing to banks unless they can be charged extortionate rates of interest and borrowing fees. Should we, any of us, be obliged to embroil ourselves in the banking system in order to be able to function as citizens in any practical way? Debates about the future of money should not simply focus on questions of efficiency and convenience then, but on the values and ideals we associate with money and with being members of any community or society. This is why I don't really see the future of money as being defined by Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency on its own. Partly because I think, as I've said, Bitcoin tends to replicate and in some ways exacerbate existing inequalities of wealth and power that we see in the financial system. But I do think that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, probably particularly other cryptocurrencies, are best seen as part of a diverse future for money. And I will finish by saying that I think a pluralistic monetary system where cryptocurrency is used alongside cash, payments cards, local and community currencies is more likely to be resilient, more open, and more democratic. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Dodd, for those thought-provoking thoughts about Bitcoin and the wider ecosystem of cryptocurrency, and taking us up, to a higher level of thinking about these aspects of blockchain and cryptocurrencies than we might otherwise do, when we're busy studying various specific aspects of this technology. It's very important to think about not just, the problem of efficiency or scalability or whatever particular problem we are working on, but to stand back from what we're proposing to build or how we're using the innovation to think about the broader implications, which you have admirably done. So I would like, in the remaining time, we have time for a few questions. I'd like to ask people to either post their questions to the chat or raise your hands. So we do have one question already coming in the chat from Connor. And he asks, what are your thoughts on the standard anti-Bitcoin argument that it can be used for moral illegal purposes that is then hard for the state to regulate due to the nature of Bitcoin? So we'll start with that one.
Yeah, I remember the early days of the Brixton pound, one of the designers was quite upset that, in a comic way, that the Brixton pound lacked the selling point of Bitcoin, which was, you couldn't buy drugs or porn with it. So that there was a certain appeal, and he argued that was due to the success of Bitcoin was down to this. But I think you could equally say this about cash. Cash is king of the Saturday economy amongst builders and plumbers and so forth in my hometown. And cash is still the preferred currency of choice of lots of immoral and illegal purchases. So I think there is obviously a problem with Bitcoin and crypto, but it's a problem that runs through financial system and through the cash economy, and isn't at all restricted to Bitcoin. And I think there's a lot to be said for freedom in this sense. I think there's a lot to be said for our freedom to engage in financial transactions that aren't necessarily being traced or recorded. I think that's important. I'm not a libertarian, but I do believe that's a really important feature of cash and of crypto in general. But I think it's unfortunate that Bitcoin has this reputation.
Yeah. So I don't know if this will take us in a different direction, but we have a hand up from Zach. And Zach, if you'd like to open your microphone and ask your question.
I really enjoyed your talk, so thank you. I appreciate the financial aspects. I'm coming from a community research and sovereignty aspect, and so I'm very interested in kind of the deliberative forum aspects of technological design. Can you hear me better?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Totally. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm coming from a community research perspective and looking at kind of the potential of DAOs to kind of act as deliberative oversight or a forum, like an actual digital physical space. And so I was just wondering if you had any currencies or any projects that you think are handling the stakeholder and deliberative side of governance for these currencies. Yeah, just.
I'm hoping that the Brixton pound will give me some insight into this. I mean, I will be watching closely as they come to they're designing currently what they want to do, and I think they want to mint a coin that rewards good social outcomes. The thing that worries me slightly about this is this sounds a little bit Black Mirror. I don't know if you know the series Black Mirror, where there's a particular episode where there's a reputational currency and it just destroys the whole fabric of trust quite quickly. And I've had some fairly kind of creepy accounts of reputational currencies. Now, obviously, there's but according to the designers of the Brixton Pound, or their version of crypto, that they're not going down this, reward people for putting their rubbish bins out or for doing their recycling properly. They want to genuinely reward community projects. And so I'm intrigued as to whether they're able to build that into the design of the currency itself. So that's where I think I'm looking. I'm also intrigued, obviously, by UBI and whether something similar can operate there. What's interesting about UBI is, again, it has this very local emphasis. So I guess for me, the question is whether this sort of community aspect always has to be local, always has to be embedded within a particular community, or whether it can go beyond that. So yeah, that's all I know in terms of my experience of crypto so far, in relation to that. But I think it's one of the most interesting aspects. So if there's anything that you're discovering yourself, then I'd love to know about it, maybe on email or something.
Yeah. Just enmeshing in local processes. I think the human connection is a very important aspect for an empathetic system. So it's I want systems to reflect my local issues that I engage with, and then provide pathways for engagement, but it's based in that local, and then you nest relationships outwards, but it's deliberative. So just seeing how blockchain can do that, or if it can.
And would be interesting to theorize those around various theories of ethics and communicative action, for example. So that would be quite fun to think about.
Yeah, we are running up against time. If you have time for one more question, Professor.
Yeah, of course.
Dodd, yeah, I'm going to cherry pick, and I do apologize to those who have posted questions that I'm not going to pick. I'm going to be quite selfish and just ask you this question from Esther, because I'm curious about it too, Esther. Not that I'm not also curious about the other questions, but so Esther asks, how do you predict the best worst case relationship between governments and the crypto space? Do you predict more bans or more regulation cooperation, which will privilege, validate some over others, more of a competition? So what will this augur for different cryptocurrencies? Worst
case scenario, surely a Fed issued digital currency just to close the whole space down would be a nightmare. I think so. I think that's I don't know if that's interpreting your question correctly, but when I see the Fed chair, I think he's wrong anyway. I don't think a Fed digital currency would completely kill the stablecoin space for all the kinds of reasons that we associate with freedom. I don't think people would simply adopt a Fed currency over stablecoins because the Fed produces one. But I think it would make life very, very difficult. Best case, it's tricky, isn't it? Because one doesn't want to imagine governments becoming too closely involved in this space, because it loses its character. And I can always imagine different forms of crypto spinning off if governments try and get their teeth. So for me, I still would like to see governments keep a certain distance from crypto. I'm also worried actually about corporations becoming more involved. I don't particularly like the prospect of DM, the Facebook currency, partly because I loathe Facebook and everything it stands for. But I think I find that quite disturbing, the idea that this DM could really take over because it's got such a strong, existing marketplace. So it's not a very good answer, because I haven't really thought about this from the perspective of regulation, I guess. But do I, predict more bans, more regulation, cooperation? What I would hate to see is I read the paper by the DM guys, and what it sounded to me like they were making a very corporate case for DM, which I found actually quite depressing, to be honest. It had none of the excitement or buzz that you get when you're reading other crypto things. It just sounded like two guys who were kind of making a business case. And making claims that were, very self-serving. So, I think seeing this thing looking more and more like a corporation would be quite depressing. And I think that kind of plays into the government narrative. Pretty bad answer, but it's the best I can do at this time of the day.
Not at all. Well, we're past 5 past. We could keep going. We'd love to keep you here longer, but we promised only to keep you for an hour. But the feedback on the chat is very positive about your reflections, and thank you for sharing your expertise and your deep thinking about the theory of money and how we can look at these Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies from that perspective and from a more sociological perspective. So no doubt there'll be many people turning to your writing after this to look further and maybe reaching out to you.
I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to talk to you as well, Victoria, in more detail. But anybody present that has extra questions or insights for me and expertise, or wants to find out a bit more about what's going on here in London with Brixton, would just please do reach out. I'd love to talk to you. It's been great to kind of interact with real blockchain experts.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your being here with us. So we'll say goodbye for now, but we'll keep in touch, and all the best to you. And we look forward to following your research.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.